I never thought a basketball hoop would become the center of a neighborhood war, but when Margaret Henderson showed up at my door with her clipboard and pursed lips, I knew my Tuesday evening was about to take a turn for the worse. My name is Keith Forrester, and I had lived in the Meadowbrook Springs subdivision in Naperville, Illinois, for almost 8 years. The neighborhood was one of those picture-perfect communities with manicured lawns, identical mailboxes, and enough rules to fill a small library. When my wife Wendy and I moved in back in 2018, we thought the HOA would just handle lawn maintenance and community events. We were wrong about a lot of things back then. The basketball hoop in question had been standing at the end of our driveway for 3 years without a single complaint. It was a nice one, too, a Spalding with an adjustable height that I had installed myself one Saturday morning after our son, Tyler, begged for it on his 12th birthday. The thing had become more than just a hoop. It was where Tyler and his friends gathered after school. It was where neighbors stopped to chat while their kids played. It was where I shot around on Sunday mornings with my coffee, pretending I still had my college jump shot. Margaret stood on my front porch that September evening, her bottle blonde hair sprayed into submission despite the humid air. She wore a navy blazer even though it was 78 degrees outside, and her smile had all the warmth of a tax audit. "Mr. Forrester, I assume you received the letter," she said, not bothering with pleasantries. I had received it. 3 days earlier, a formal notice on HOA letterhead had arrived in my mailbox, informing me that my basketball hoop violated Section 12.4 of the Community Guidelines, which stated that all recreational equipment must be stored out of sight when not in use. I was given 14 days to remove the hoop or face daily fines starting at $50. "I got it," I said, leaning against the doorframe. "But Margaret, that hoop has been there for 3 years. Why is this suddenly a problem?" Her smile tightened. "The board recently completed a comprehensive review of all community standards. Several violations were identified, and yours is among them. The rules are quite clear, Mr. Forrester. Portable basketball hoops are permitted, but they must be moved to a garage or backyard storage area when not actively being used." "It is actively being used. Kids play on it almost every day." "Then it should be moved every day," she replied, her tone suggesting this was perfectly reasonable. "The aesthetics of our community are what maintain our property values. I'm sure you understand." Behind me, I heard Wendy's footsteps. She appeared at my shoulder, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Margaret, that seems a bit excessive. The hoop isn't hurting anyone." Margaret's expression shifted to one of practiced sympathy. "Mrs. Forrester, I know change can be difficult, but as board president, I have a responsibility to all residents. The rules apply equally to everyone." That was rich coming from someone who had a decorative fountain in her front yard that ran 24/7, creating enough noise to drown out conversation when you walked past her house. But I bit my tongue. "I'll think about it," I said, starting to close the door. 14 days, Mr. Forrester. The clock is ticking." Margaret turned on her heel and walked back to her silver Lexus, parked at an angle that blocked half of our mailbox. Wendy sighed as I shut the door. "She's really going through with this, apparently." I walked into the kitchen where Tyler sat at the counter, doing homework with one earbud in. He was 15 now, tall and lanky, all elbows and attitude. But when I told him about the situation, his face fell in a way that reminded me he was still just a kid. "They can't make us take it down," he said. "That's where everyone hangs out." "I know, buddy. Let me figure something out." But figuring something out proved harder than expected. Over the next few days, I read through the entire HOA covenant, all 67 pages of dense legal language. Section 12.4 was indeed there, buried among rules about fence heights and approved paint colors. The problem was that the rule had never been enforced. Half the driveways in our subdivision had basketball hoops, and none of them were moved daily. I called the other homeowners, starting with my neighbor Jake Rodriguez, whose hoop was even more permanent than mine, set in concrete at the edge of his property. Jake was a laid-back guy who worked in IT and usually avoided confrontation. "Yeah, I got the same letter," he said when I reached him. "Complete garbage, right? I'm planning to ignore it and see what happens." "Did she say why now? Why after all these years?" Jake laughed, but it was bitter. "You really don't know. Margaret's son Brandon tried out for the high school basketball team last month, didn't make the cut. Word is she blames kids like Tyler who have been playing pickup games and getting better while Brandon sits inside playing video games." I felt my jaw tighten. "You're kidding." "Wish I was. My wife heard it from Sandra Chen, who's on the school board. Apparently, Margaret made a whole scene at the tryout results posting, saying the selection process was biased toward kids with home practice equipment. This was even pettier than I had imagined. Margaret was punishing the entire neighborhood because her 17-year-old son didn't make the basketball team. The rage building in my chest was quickly replaced by determination. If she wanted a fight over this, she was going to get one. That Friday evening, I organized an impromptu meeting at our house. Jake came, along with Sandra Chen and her husband Paul, the Morrison family from 2 streets over, and about 8 other families who had received similar letters. We gathered in our backyard while kids played on the hoop out front, their laughter drifting over the fence. "This is targeted harassment," Sandra said, pulling up the HOA bylaws on her tablet. "Look at Section 4. Any enforcement action must be applied uniformly across the community." I counted at least 23 basketball hoops in Meadowbrook Springs. Did all 23 households get letters? We compared notes. Only 9 families had been cited, and after some discussion, we realized what they had in common. Every single one had a teenager who played basketball, either on school teams or just recreationally. Every single one had kids who were at the hoop constantly, getting better, being visible. Paul Chen shook his head. My lawyer brain is tingling. This is selective enforcement, which means the HOA is violating its own governing documents. Can we fight it? Wendy asked. We can try, Paul said. But HOA legal battles are expensive and time-consuming. Even if we're in the right, they have the community funds to drag this out. That's when Tyler appeared in the backyard doorway, and he wasn't alone. Behind him stood at least 15 kids, ranging from about 10 to 17 years old. They looked nervous but determined. "Dad, can we talk to everyone?" Tyler asked. I nodded, curious where this was going. The kids filed into the yard, and I recognized most of them. There was Marcus from down the street, twin sisters Zoe and Chloe who lived in the corner house, little Danny Morrison, who was barely tall enough to reach the hoop on its lowest setting. They gathered in a semicircle, and Tyler stepped forward. "We heard you guys talking about the basketball hoops," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "And we want to help. This isn't just about one hoop. It's about all of us having a place to hang out that isn't just screens and sitting around." Marcus, a stocky kid with impressive confidence for 15, jumped in. "Since Mr. Forrester put up his hoop, our whole street changed. We actually know each other now. Before that, everyone just went inside after school and that was it. Now we play games, we talk. We're like actual friends instead of just people who live near each other." One of the younger kids, a girl named Sophie, raised her hand like she was in class before speaking. "My mom says the hoops make the neighborhood feel alive. She likes hearing us play when she's making dinner." Tyler pulled out his phone. "We want to do something. We were thinking maybe a petition. If we got a bunch of signatures saying people want the hoops to stay, would that help?" The adults exchanged glances. Sandra was smiling. "You know what? That might actually help quite a bit. The HOA board is elected by residents. If we can show community support for keeping the hoops, it puts pressure on them to back down or at least put it to a vote." "We could do more than a petition," Jake said, warming to the idea. "We could organize a community basketball day. Invite everyone, show how these hoops bring people together. Make it a positive story instead of just a conflict." The energy in the backyard shifted from frustrated to hopeful. We spent the next hour planning. The kids would create a petition, both physical and digital, to gather signatures. We would organize a community basketball event for the following Saturday, with games for all ages, food, and music. And Paul would draft a formal response to the HOA, citing the selective enforcement issue and requesting a community meeting before any fines were levied. Over the next week, those kids became a force of nature. Tyler and his friends went door to door every afternoon after school, clipboards in hand, explaining the situation to neighbors. They set up a folding table at the subdivision entrance on Saturday morning, catching people as they left for errands. They created an online petition that got shared on every local social media group. I watched my son transform during those days. The teenager who usually grunted one-word answers at dinner was suddenly articulate and passionate, explaining to Mrs. Patterson why the hoops mattered, listening to Mr. Nguyen's concerns about noise and addressing them thoughtfully. He was growing up right in front of me, and it was over a basketball hoop. By Wednesday, they had 200 signatures. By Friday, they were over 400. Our subdivision only had 350 houses. Margaret noticed. Of course she noticed. She started appearing at random times, driving slowly past the kids' petition table, watching from her car with narrowed eyes. On Thursday evening, she sent out an email to all HOA members warning them about misleading information being spread by certain residents regarding community standards. The email backfired spectacularly. People who might have stayed neutral were suddenly curious about what was happening, and when they heard the full story, most sided with us. Turns out nobody liked the idea of petty enforcement based on personal grudges. The community basketball day arrived with perfect September weather. We had set it up at the cul-de-sac at the end of Maple Drive, where Jake's hoop provided the main court, and we had set up 2 portable hoops for additional games. Wendy and Sandra had organized a potluck, so folding tables groaned under the weight of casseroles, chips, cookies, and enough beverages to float a ship. By 10 in the morning, the street was packed. Little kids played on the hoops set to 6 feet, shrieking with delight every time the ball went through the net. Teenagers ran full court games with the intensity of playoff matches. Adults stood around talking and laughing, many of them meeting neighbors they had never spoken to despite living a few houses apart for years. I was manning the grill, flipping burgers and hot dogs, when I saw Margaret's Lexus cruise past. She slowed down, staring at the crowd, her expression caught between shock and fury. She didn't stop. "Don't worry about her," Jake said, appearing beside me with an empty platter. "She can't fine us for having a block party." "Well, probably. Did anyone check the rules about block parties?" Paul did. "We're good as long as we end by 8 and don't block anyone's driveway access." The day rolled on with the easy joy of a community actually being a community. Mr. Patel, who was 73 and used a cane, told stories about playing basketball in Mumbai as a young man. The Morrison kids taught some of the younger children proper free throw technique. Someone's portable speaker played music that shifted from classic rock to current pop as different age groups took control. Around 3 in the afternoon, Tyler found me refilling the coolers with ice. "Dad, we need to show you something." He led me to the petition table, where Marcus and several other kids were gathered around a laptop. Marcus turned the screen toward me, grinning. 547 signatures, and check out who just signed. He scrolled down to the most recent entries, and my eyes widened. There, among the names, were several HOA board members. Not Margaret, obviously, but 3 of the 5 other board members had signed the petition to keep the basketball hoops. "This is huge," I said. "If 3 board members support us, Margaret can't unilaterally enforce the removal." Sandra, who had wandered over, pulled out her phone. "I'm texting Paul. We need to request an emergency board meeting before the deadline. With this kind of community support and board division, we might actually win this." That evening, as families started packing up and heading home, Margaret's Lexus appeared again. This time, she parked and got out, walking toward us with rigid posture. Several people stopped talking, sensing confrontation. "Quite the gathering," Margaret said, her voice tight. "I hope you all obtained the proper permits for this event." "No permit required for a neighborhood get-together on a public street," Paul said calmly. He had arrived an hour earlier, and I was grateful for his lawyer presence. "Is there something we can help you with, Margaret?" She smiled that cold smile. "Just observing. I'm sure you're all aware that the deadline for basketball hoop removal is Monday. I'd hate for anyone to face unnecessary fines." Tyler stepped forward, and I felt a surge of pride mixed with concern. "Mrs. Henderson, did you see the petition? Over 500 people want the hoops to stay." "I'm not interested in popularity contests, young man. I'm interested in maintaining community standards." "Even when half your own board disagrees with you?" Sandra asked, her voice pleasant but her eyes sharp. "Because we have signatures from board members too." Margaret's expression flickered, just for a second, revealing uncertainty beneath the confidence. But she recovered quickly. "The board will meet next Thursday as regularly scheduled. Until then, the rules stand as written." She turned and walked back to her car, and I noticed her hands were shaking slightly as she opened the door. She was rattled, even if she wouldn't admit it. Paul requested an emergency board meeting through official channels that night, citing community concern and board member interest. According to HOA bylaws, if 3 board members requested a special meeting, it had to be scheduled within 5 business days. By Saturday morning, we had confirmation. The meeting would be held Tuesday evening at the community center, 2 days after the supposed removal deadline. The weekend was tense. I found myself checking the mail obsessively, expecting fine notices to appear. Tyler was uncharacteristically quiet, all his nervous energy from the previous week replaced by anxious waiting. Wendy tried to keep things normal, but even she jumped every time a car drove past. Monday came and went. The basketball hoop stayed in our driveway, along with every other hoop in the neighborhood. No fines appeared in any mailboxes. Jake called me Monday evening, confused. "Think she's waiting until after the meeting, maybe. Or maybe she knows she's losing control of this and doesn't want to make it worse." Tuesday evening, the community center meeting room was standing room only. The HOA board meetings usually drew maybe 15 residents on a busy night. Tonight, there were at least 150 people crammed into a space designed for 60. The fire marshal would have had a heart attack. The board sat at a long table in front. Margaret in the center, flanked by Carol Zhang, Robert Miller, James Patterson, and Deanne Kowalski. 3 of those 4 had signed the petition. Margaret looked like she had swallowed something sour. "This meeting will come to order," Margaret announced, banging a gavel that seemed ridiculous under the circumstances. We have several items on tonight's agenda, including landscaping quotes for the common areas and plans for the holiday decoration contest. Point of order, Paul Chen called from the front row. This is an emergency meeting called specifically to address the basketball hoop enforcement issue. According to bylaws, emergency meetings must focus on the issue that triggered them before moving to general business. Margaret's jaw tightened. Very well. I assume you want to discuss the enforcement of Section 12.4. We do, Paul said, standing. He had dressed in a full suit for this, his lawyer armor. Specifically, we want to discuss the selective enforcement of that section, which violates the HOA's governing documents and potentially opens the association to legal liability. For the next 20 minutes, Paul laid out the case with devastating precision. He showed records of basketball hoops that hadn't been cited. He presented the timeline of enforcement letters coinciding with high school basketball tryouts. He cited case law about selective enforcement in HOA disputes. He was brilliant when he finished. Carol Zhang, who was a retired schoolteacher with a no-nonsense demeanor, spoke up. I'd like to hear from the residents directly. Show of hands, how many people here support keeping the basketball hoops as they are? A forest of hands went up. I counted quickly, over 100. Margaret's face went pale. And how many support removal? 4 hands. Margaret's plus 3 elderly residents I didn't recognize. Robert Miller, who owned a construction company, leaned forward. Margaret, I think it's pretty clear where the community stands. I move that we table enforcement of Section 12.4 pending a comprehensive review of all recreational equipment rules. Second, Carol said immediately. We can't just ignore the rules, Margaret protested, her voice rising. That's not how an HOA works. Today it's basketball hoops, tomorrow it's plastic flamingos and broken-down cars on blocks. That's a slippery slope fallacy and you know it, James Patterson said. He was an English professor at the local community college, and his academic tone cut through Margaret's hysteria. We're talking about basketball hoops that bring kids outside and neighbors together. The comparison to junk is insulting. Deanne Kowalski, the quietest board member, finally spoke. I've lived here for 20 years. I've seen this neighborhood get quieter and more isolated as kids spend more time on their devices. Those basketball hoops have done more for community building than any official HOA event we've organized. Why would we want to remove that? Margaret looked around the table, realizing she was completely alone. This is about property values and community standards. You're all being short-sighted. Actually, Carol said, pulling out her own tablet, I did some research. I looked at comparable subdivisions in Naperville and surrounding areas. Neighborhoods with visible outdoor recreational features like basketball hoops, playgrounds, and walking paths have property values an average of 3 to 5% higher than subdivisions without them. Families want places where kids can play safely. The evidence kept stacking against Margaret's position. Then Tyler stood up in the back of the room and my heart jumped into my throat. He looked terrified but determined. Can I say something? He asked. Margaret looked like she wanted to refuse, but with the entire room watching, she nodded curtly. Tyler walked to the front and I saw his hands trembling slightly. I'm Tyler Forrester. The hoop in my driveway is what started all this. Mrs. Henderson, I know your son Brandon. He's a nice guy. We have algebra together. And I'm sorry he didn't make the basketball team. That really sucks. But taking away everyone's hoops isn't going to change that or make it better. The room was dead silent. Margaret's face had gone from pale to flushed red. Tyler continued. What the hoops do is give all of us a place to get better together. If Brandon wants to improve for tryouts next year, he can come play with us anytime. That's what we've been doing. Marcus couldn't make a layup when we started. Now he's one of the best players at school. We help each other. That's what the hoops are really about. He pulled out a folded piece of paper from his pocket. I have something else. We made a second petition. This one was just kids, just people our age who live in Meadowbrook Springs. We asked if they wanted the hoops to stay. Marcus stood up, holding another sheet. Then Zoe and Chloe stood, each with papers. Then more kids, until about 20 teenagers and preteens were on their feet, all holding petitions. We got 412 signatures from kids under 18 who live here, Tyler said. That's basically every kid in the subdivision old enough to write their name. 412 kids want the basketball hoops to stay. Then he looked directly at Margaret and his voice dropped. Mrs. Henderson, your son Brandon signed the petition. He wants the hoops to stay too. The room erupted. People were talking over each other, some laughing, some expressing shock. Margaret looked like she had been slapped. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. That's not possible, she finally whispered. Tyler walked to the board table and placed his petition in front of her. It's the third signature on page 2. Margaret stared at the paper. I couldn't see her expression from where I sat, but her shoulders slumped forward. The fight seemed to drain out of her all at once. Carol Zhang cleared her throat. I think we've heard enough. I call for a vote on Robert's motion to table enforcement of Section 12.4. All in favor. 4 hands went up. Carol, Robert, James, and Deanne. Opposed? Margaret didn't raise her hand. She didn't move at all. Motion passes 4-0 with 1 abstention, Carol declared. The basketball hoops stay pending a comprehensive community survey about recreational equipment rules, which we'll conduct over the next few months. This meeting is adjourned. The room broke into applause and cheering. Kids were hugging each other. Wendy grabbed my arm, her eyes bright with tears. Tyler was surrounded by his friends, all of them talking excitedly. I watched Margaret gather her papers with shaking hands and stand up. She looked smaller somehow, diminished. Part of me felt bad for her, but mostly I felt relieved that this was over. Except it wasn't quite over. As people filed out of the community center, still buzzing with energy, I noticed Brandon Henderson standing near the back corner. He was tall like his mother, but where she was all sharp angles and tension, he seemed soft and uncertain. Tyler saw him at the same moment I did. My son walked over and I was close enough to hear their conversation. Hey, Tyler said. Thanks for signing. Brandon shrugged, looking uncomfortable. It was the right thing to do. I told my mom it was stupid to go after the hoops, but she doesn't really listen to me about that stuff. You should come play sometime, seriously. We're out there most afternoons. I'm not very good. None of us were at first, that's kind of the point. I saw something shift in Brandon's expression, hope replacing resignation. Yeah, okay, maybe I will. As we walked to the car, Wendy took my hand. I'm proud of you, she said. Not many people would have fought this hard over a basketball hoop. It stopped being about the hoop pretty early on, I replied. It became about whether one person's grudge could overrule an entire community. Tyler climbed into the backseat, but his usual teenage silence was replaced by animated recap of the evening. Did you see Mrs. Henderson's face when I mentioned Brandon? I wasn't trying to embarrass her. I just thought she should know her own kid disagreed with her. It was brave, I said. And you handled it well. You didn't attack her, just stated facts. Mr. Chen helped me practice what to say. He said in any argument, stick to facts and it's harder for people to dismiss you. We drove home through the quiet streets of Meadowbrook Springs, past house after house with glowing windows and ordinary lives. When we pulled into our driveway, the basketball hoop stood there like it always had. No longer a symbol of conflict, but just a hoop again. The next few days were peaceful in the way that follows a storm. Word spread quickly through the subdivision about what had happened at the meeting, and the story took on legendary proportions with each retelling. By Thursday, I heard someone at the grocery store describe it as the night the kids staged a revolution, which was dramatic but not entirely inaccurate. Margaret Henderson resigned from the HOA board on Friday. She sent a brief email to all residents citing personal reasons and a desire to spend more time with family. Carol Zhang was named interim president, and she immediately put together a task force to review all HOA rules and recommend updates. Tyler was invited to join as the youth representative, which made him nervous and proud in equal measure. The more interesting development happened the following Monday. I was washing my car in the driveway when I heard the distinctive sound of a basketball bouncing on pavement. I looked up to see Brandon Henderson walking down the sidewalk, a worn basketball under his arm, heading toward our house. Tyler was in the garage, organizing his basketball cards, a hobby he claimed to have outgrown but clearly hadn't. He heard the bouncing too and came out, surprise evident on his face. "Hey," Brandon said, stopping at the edge of our driveway. "You said I could come play sometime. Is now okay?" Tyler glanced at me and I gave a subtle nod. "Yeah, definitely. Let me grab my shoes." Within 10 minutes, 5 other kids had appeared, drawn by the sound of play like moths to light. They ran games of 3-on-3, rotating in and out, and I noticed that the other kids made sure to pass to Brandon, to set him up for shots, to encourage him when he made a basket. Tyler had clearly spread the word about making Brandon feel welcome. I went inside to find Wendy watching from the kitchen window, smiling. "That's nice," she said. "Very nice. Though I'm not sure what Margaret thinks about it. She probably doesn't know." I saw her leave about an hour ago, huge suitcase in her car. Emily Morrison heard she's visiting her sister in Colorado for a few weeks. Margaret's temporary absence gave Brandon freedom he clearly hadn't had before. Over the next couple of weeks, he became a regular at the afternoon basketball games. He wasn't a natural athlete and probably wouldn't make the school team next year either, but he got better. More importantly, he got happier. The sullen, hunched posture gradually straightened. He smiled more. He made jokes. The other kids genuinely seemed to like him, not because they felt sorry for him, but because he was actually a decent person when not crushed under his mother's expectations. October arrived with cooling temperatures and brilliant fall colors. Carol Zhang called a community meeting to present the task force's recommendations for updated HOA rules. The meeting was much less dramatic than the previous one, but the outcome was significant. The board voted to officially amend Section 12.4 to allow permanent recreational equipment like basketball hoops, provided they were maintained in good condition and didn't create safety hazards. They also added a new section specifically protecting community gathering activities and recognizing them as beneficial to property values and neighborhood cohesion. Paul Chen helped draft the language, making sure it was broad enough to encourage community interaction but specific enough to prevent actual problems. "It's a good compromise," Paul told me after the meeting, "and it sets a precedent that this HOA values community input over rigid rule enforcement." But the real turning point came in mid-October when Margaret returned from Colorado. I saw her Lexus pull into her driveway on a Thursday afternoon, and I'll admit, I felt anxious about what would happen next. Would she resume her campaign? Would things get ugly again? That Saturday morning, I was shooting around in the driveway when Margaret walked up. Not drove, walked. She wore jeans and a simple sweater, her hair less rigid than usual. "Keith, can we talk?" she asked. I caught the ball and held it. Sure. She took a breath, clearly uncomfortable. I owe you an apology. I owe a lot of people apologies, but I'm starting with you since your hoop was the first one I targeted. I waited, not making it easier for her but not making it harder either. I was angry about Brandon and basketball, but it was deeper than that. He's my only child, and I put so much pressure on him to be perfect, to succeed at everything. When he didn't make the team, I saw it as my failure as much as his. So I lashed out at what I saw as the reason for that failure instead of looking at what I was doing wrong. She glanced toward our house, where the hoop stood. I spent 3 weeks with my sister, who's a therapist. She didn't let me get away with any of my nonsense, made me really look at why I needed to control everything and everyone. It wasn't pretty. That takes courage, I said, and I meant it. Brandon told me he's been playing here, with Tyler and the other kids. He's happier than I've seen him in years. Her voice cracked slightly. I almost destroyed that because of my own issues. I almost destroyed his chance to just be a normal kid with friends. He's a good kid, Margaret. The other kids like him. She nodded, blinking rapidly. Thank you for letting him be part of this, and I'm sorry for everything. The letters, the threats, the whole mess. I was wrong. I held out the basketball. You want to take a shot? She laughed, surprised. I haven't played basketball since high school. Neither have most of us. That's not really the point. Margaret took the ball, walked to the free throw line that Tyler had marked on the driveway with chalk, and shot. The ball bounced off the rim, but she smiled anyway. Out of practice. You should come play sometime. We have pickup games on Sunday mornings, all skill levels welcome. I might take you up on that. She handed the ball back. I resigned from the board, I'm sure you heard. I did. But you know, Carol is looking for volunteers for the Community Events Committee. If you want to stay involved in a less stressful way. She looked surprised that I was offering her a path back into community involvement. I'll think about it. Thanks, Keith. After she left, Wendy came outside. Did I just see what I think I saw? Margaret Henderson apologizing and shooting a basketball in our driveway. Yeah, you did. Miracles do happen. Or people can change when they actually confront their issues. The following Sunday, Margaret didn't show up for pickup basketball, but I hadn't really expected her to. That was fine. The important thing was that Brandon did show up, and he'd gotten better enough that he made several impressive assists that had the other kids cheering. Tyler was beside me at one point, drinking water between games. Dad, you think we could organize a neighborhood 3-on-3 tournament, like an official one with brackets and everything? That could be fun. You need to organize it, though. Get kids to commit to teams, set up a schedule. I can do that. Marcus and I already talked about it. I watched my son jog back onto the makeshift court, calling for the ball and sinking a jump shot that would have made his old man proud. The hoop that had almost been removed was now the center of something bigger than basketball. It was community, friendship, growth, and second chances. Over the next few months, life in Meadowbrook Springs settled into a new normal. The 3-on-3 tournament Tyler organized became an annual event, held every October with teams from our subdivision and neighboring communities. Brandon Henderson made the junior varsity basketball team his sophomore year, not because he suddenly became a star player, but because he improved enough and showed enough dedication that the coach gave him a shot. Margaret never did join the Sunday morning pickup games, but she did volunteer for the Community Events Committee, where her organizational skills were actually appreciated. She was better in a support role than as president, and she seemed to recognize that about herself. Carol Zhang proved to be an excellent HOA president. Under her leadership, the board shifted from being an enforcement body to being an actual community organization. They started a neighborhood watch program, organized quarterly block parties, and even installed a little free library at the entrance to the subdivision that Tyler helped build for his Eagle Scout project. The basketball hoop in my driveway stayed exactly where it was, accumulating wear and memories in equal measure. On summer evenings, I'd sit on the porch with a beer and listen to kids playing, their voices carrying across the yards. It was the sound of childhood, of community, of things being exactly as they should be. In February, I ran into Margaret at the grocery store. She was with Brandon, who had grown at least 2 more inches and was now looking her in the eye. They were laughing about something, easy in each other's company in a way I hadn't seen before. "Keith," she called when she spotted me. "I wanted to tell you that Brandon made JV. He's been playing point guard." "That's fantastic," I said, genuinely happy for him. "Congratulations, Brandon." He grinned. "Thanks, Mr. Forrester, and thanks for letting me play on your hoop. Coach said my court awareness is really good. I learned a lot of that from the pickup games." After they walked away, I stood in the produce section thinking about how a simple basketball hoop had become the catalyst for so much change. It had exposed the fault lines in how our HOA operated, brought a community together, helped a struggling kid find confidence, and pushed a controlling mother to confront her issues. When I got home, Tyler was in the driveway with 4 friends, running shooting drills. The temperature was barely 40 degrees, but they were in shorts and t-shirts, oblivious to the cold. "Dad, come on," Tyler called. "We need someone to play defense." I put the groceries inside and grabbed a jacket. For the next hour, I ran around with teenagers who were faster and had better stamina than me, and I loved every minute of it. My knees would hurt later, and Wendy would roll her eyes at me trying to keep up with kids half my age, but it was worth it. That night at dinner, Wendy asked Tyler about his college plans. He was a junior now, starting to think about applications and future paths. "I'm thinking about sports management," he said, "or maybe community development. Something where I can help create programs that bring people together, like what happened with the hoops." I felt a swell of pride so strong it was almost painful. My son had learned that standing up for what matters and building community were valuable skills. He'd learned that sometimes the fight is worth it, and that change can happen when people come together. "Those are great fields," Wendy said. "You'd be good at either one." "I want to do something that matters," Tyler continued. I know that sounds corny, but watching how the whole neighborhood changed because we fought to keep the hoops made me realize that small things can have big impacts. Later, after Tyler had gone upstairs, Wendy and I sat on the couch in our living room. Through the front window, we could see the basketball hoop, illuminated by the street light. "You ever think about what would have happened if we just removed it?" Wendy asked. "If you decided it wasn't worth the fight, sometimes," I admitted. "We would have complied. Margaret would have stayed president and gotten worse, and all those kids would have lost their gathering place. Brandon Henderson might still be isolated and miserable. The HOA would still be more about control than community." One basketball hoop changed a lot. It wasn't the hoop. It was people deciding to push back against unfairness and build something better. Spring arrived, and with it came warmer weather and longer days. The basketball hoop saw constant use as kids stayed outside until the streetlights came on. New families moved into Meadowbrook Springs, and their kids were quickly absorbed into the pickup games, and the informal community that had formed around the hoops scattered throughout the subdivision. One of the new families had a daughter, Sophie Kim, who had played competitive basketball in their previous town. She was only 13 but could drain 3-pointers like a college player. Within a week, she was teaching the other kids her techniques, and the overall skill level of the neighborhood games jumped noticeably. In April, Carol Zhang announced she would run for another term as HOA president, and nobody ran against her. At the annual meeting, she reflected on the past year and specifically mentioned the basketball hoop incident. "A year ago, this board almost made a serious mistake," she said. "We almost let one person's personal agenda override common sense and community values. The fact that our own children had to organize a petition to stop us should have been embarrassing. Instead, I choose to see it as a teaching moment. We need to listen to residents, especially the younger residents who are growing up here and whose needs we sometimes overlook." She announced several new initiatives, including a youth advisory council that would bring student input to HOA decisions. Tyler was elected as one of the first council members, along with Marcus, Sophie Kim, and Brandon Henderson. The basketball hoop that started it all was showing its age by summer. The net was frayed, the backboard had a crack in one corner, and the adjustment mechanism was getting sticky. Tyler wanted to replace it with a newer model. "Let's keep this one," I said. "We can fix the net and the mechanism." This hoop has history now. So we repaired it instead, and Tyler added a small plaque at the base that read, "Community Built, 2024. Defended by 412 Kids, 2024. It was cheesy, but it made both of us smile. In August, Brandon's mother, Margaret, approached Wendy about organizing a back-to-school community dinner. Margaret had been quietly working on the events committee, and this was her first time taking the lead on a project. The dinner was a huge success, with over 200 residents attending. Margaret was organized and efficient, but also warm in a way she hadn't been before. People actually seemed to enjoy working with her. Tyler left for college in the fall of 2026, heading to the University of Illinois to study community development. The day we dropped him off at his dorm, he made me promise to send him updates about the neighborhood basketball games. "I want to know who's getting good, who's causing drama, all of it," he said. "That hoop is part of who I am now." With Tyler gone, I expected the driveway to be quieter, but the younger kids kept coming. Marcus, now a senior, took on the role of organizer that Tyler had held, making sure everyone got to play and mediating the occasional dispute. Brandon Henderson had grown into a confident young man who helped coach the younger kids. The community that had formed around a fight to keep a basketball hoop continued to thrive. On a Saturday morning in October 2026, I was shooting around by myself, enjoying the cool fall air and pretending I could still make the shots I'd made in my 20s. A car pulled up, and Margaret got out with a basketball under her arm. "Mind if I join you?" she asked. I was surprised but pleased. "Not at all." We shot around together, not keeping score, just enjoying the simple pleasure of tossing a ball at a hoop. She was rusty, but she'd clearly played before with decent form and follow-through. "I never thanked you properly," Margaret said between shots. "For not holding a grudge, for giving Brandon a place to belong, for helping me see what I was doing wrong." "Water under the bridge," I said, passing her the ball. "It really isn't, though. I caused real harm, and you and your family responded with grace. That's not nothing." She made a shot from the free throw line, and we both watched it swish through the net. "Carol wants me to run for the board again next year. I'm thinking about it." "You should. You've grown a lot, and the board could use someone with your organizational skills who's also learned to listen." That's what Brandon said. He's become quite wise for a 17-year-old. We played for another 20 minutes, and then Margaret said she needed to get to a committee meeting. After she left, I stood in my driveway looking at the basketball hoop, this object that had become so much more than the sum of its parts. That evening, Tyler video called from college. "How's the hoop?" he asked after filling us in on his classes and dorm life. Still standing. Your mom's trying to get me to replace it, but I'm holding firm. Good. Some things should stay the same. He paused, then continued, Dad, I'm writing a paper for my community development class about grassroots organizing. Can I write about the basketball hoop thing? Of course. You lived it. That's the thing. I've been thinking about it a lot, about how it all happened. We were just kids who didn't want to lose our hangout spot, but it turned into this whole thing about democracy and community rights and standing up to unfair authority. That's pretty cool when you think about it. After we hung up, I told Wendy about Tyler's paper. She smiled that knowing smile she got when she was right about something. I told you he'd remember this more than any vacation we ever took him on. Fighting the HOA over a basketball hoop wasn't exactly my planned parenting milestone. The best moments never are. Winter came again, the second winter since the conflict had resolved. The basketball hoop stood against snow and cold, waiting for spring and the return of constant activity. But even in winter, kids came out on milder days, their breath fogging in the cold air as they played. I had taken to keeping hot chocolate in a thermos on winter weekends, offering it to the kids who showed up. It became a tradition, and sometimes parents joined us, standing in driveways with steaming cups, watching their children play and talking about everyday things. In February 2027, Margaret Henderson was elected to the HOA board again, this time with overwhelming support. In her acceptance speech, she acknowledged her past mistakes and pledged to always prioritize community input over personal preferences. Carol remained president, and together they made an effective team. The Youth Advisory Council, which had started as a symbolic gesture, became genuinely influential. The kids pushed for a community garden, playground upgrades, and better lighting on the walking paths. They brought energy and ideas that the adult board members might not have considered. Brandon Henderson chaired the council in his final year before college, and he was good at it. Spring 2027 brought another tournament, even bigger than before. Tyler came home for spring break specifically to participate, and the reunion of the original Petition kids was joyful and loud. They had all grown, changed, but they still had the bond formed during those intense weeks of collecting signatures and fighting for their community space. Marcus was headed to play college basketball at a Division II school. Sophie Kim was being recruited by several Division I programs. Brandon was going to study business administration at Northwestern. They were all moving forward, but they all came back to shoot on the hoop in our driveway, the place where community had been built and defended. On the last night of Tyler's spring break, we had a cookout in the backyard. The core kids from the Petition effort came, along with their families. There must have been 50 people in our yard, laughing and eating and telling stories about the basketball hoop wars, as they'd come to be called. Brandon stood up at one point with his drink raised. I want to toast the Forrest family, specifically Tyler and Mr. Forrester. You didn't have to turn your driveway into community space. You didn't have to fight the HOA. You could have just removed the hoop and avoided all the drama, but you didn't, and that changed everything for a lot of us. People raised their glasses and drinks, and I felt Wendy squeeze my hand. Tyler looked embarrassed but happy, and I thought about how this simple act of refusing to back down had rippled outward in ways I never could have predicted. The evening wound down as the sun set, families gathering their kids and heading home. Tyler and I stayed outside after everyone left, sitting on the porch in the gathering dark. You glad we fought it? I asked him. Every day. Not just for keeping the hoop, but for everything that came after. I learned that adults don't always know best, that sometimes you have to push back, and that community is something you build, not something that just happens. That's a pretty mature perspective for a college freshman, he grinned. I have good teachers. Tyler went back to school, and life continued in Meadowbrook Springs. The basketball hoop remained, a fixture now as permanent as the houses and streets. Kids who hadn't even been born when the conflict happened played on it now, unaware of the history attached to it. But those of us who had lived through those intense weeks in 2024 never forgot. At HOA meetings, when debates got heated or rules were proposed that seemed arbitrary, someone would inevitably bring up the basketball hoop incident as a cautionary tale. It became shorthand for, let's make sure we're doing this for good reasons, not personal ones. Margaret Henderson fully rebuilt her reputation through consistent, humble work on the board and in the community. She would sometimes joke, self-deprecatingly, about her basketball hoop crusade, but the jokes came from a place of genuine growth and changed perspective. Brandon told Tyler that she had kept the petition with his signature, framed in her home office, as a reminder to always listen to the people closest to you. Years passed. Tyler graduated from college and got a job with a nonprofit that helped communities develop youth programs. Marcus played professional basketball in Europe for a few seasons before returning to become a high school coach. Sophie Kim became an engineer who designed sports facilities. Brandon took over his father's insurance business and joined it with a passion for community service. They all came back sometimes, visiting family or attending holidays. And they always stopped by to shoot hoops in my driveway, older and busier, but still connected by that shared experience of standing up for something that mattered to them. The basketball hoop itself eventually did need to be replaced. In 2029, after weathering 5 winters and countless games, the backboard finally cracked beyond repair. Tyler came home to help me install the new one, and we buried the old backboard in the yard with a small ceremony that felt both silly and appropriate. But before we did, we saved that little plaque Tyler had made. Community built, 2024. Defended by 412 kids, 2024. It went on the new hoop, a reminder that some things are worth fighting for, and that communities are built by ordinary people refusing to accept unnecessary rules and choosing connection over control. I'm older now, and shooting around in the driveway is harder on my knees than it used to be. But I still do it. Still welcome the neighborhood kids who show up, still believe that a basketball hoop can be more than just a piece of sporting equipment. It can be a symbol of community, resistance, growth, and the simple truth that sometimes the young people know better than their elders what matters most. The HOA demanded hoop removal became the story everyone in Meadowbrook Springs knew. The legend that got told to new residents and held up as an example of what a community could accomplish when it came together. The fact that it was the children, specifically, who made the difference, made it even more powerful. And whenever I see kids playing in driveways throughout our subdivision, whenever I hear the bounce of a basketball and the calls of a pickup game, I think about Margaret Henderson's letter that arrived all those years ago and smile. She had no idea what she was starting, no idea that her petty enforcement action would become a rallying cry for community engagement and youth empowerment. The basketball hoop stands in my driveway still, and I hope it always will, a monument to the power of ordinary people deciding that enough is enough, and that community matters more than rules.